Trever,
So, Mark.
um, we've talked about this briefly. I think but more so, I think you and I just talking about it off mic. And I know you've got some interesting metaphors or analogies or whatever you want to call it around this idea. But I was reading a book the other day, or my wife's reading a book, and she informed me about it, and I want to read it too. But it's called "Forgiving What You Can't Forget" by Lisa Turkhurst. And it just sparked something in me going, have we talked about forgiveness? What is forgiveness all about and for? And does forgiving mean that we forget? And obviously, I think there's some pretty easy answers and there's some more difficult answers. So I'd love to unpack that today a little bit with you.
Yeah. Well, I think even from like a perspective of maybe survival or protectiveness, there's no benefit to forgetting. Because if I forget that somebody hurt me in this way, it leaves me vulnerable to be hurt in that way again.
By that person or somebody else. Yeah,
totally. And so I think the whole concept of forgetting is actually pretty, it's not healthy. Because even in like a marriage or an intimate relationship, rupture and repair begins when we acknowledge the rupture.
What's rupture and repair for those that are?
That's a good question, Mark. Rupture and repair is a way to look at the different difficulties in relationships where if something happens that causes hurt between two individuals, we would consider that rupture.
Okay.
There's a rupture in the relationship. And then in order to repair that relationship, there has to be action done for that specific rupture. And a lot of the times we just ignore the fact that there are ruptures, don't repair them, and we move on and we wonder why the relationship isn't healthy or losing steam or whatever. And it's because there are these wounds that exist that are being rubbed against, touched on, and we've never spent the time to repair. And I think that forgetting is part of just ignoring rupture rather than repairing it. If we think about like a body, if I have a cut on my leg, maybe I can ignore it and forget that it's there and be okay.
Depends on how deep it is.
Depends on how deep it is. Depends on how dirty the wound was. Like, it is going to be better for me always to pay attention to the wound, to acknowledge it, and to spend time repairing it than just ignoring it and forgetting it ever existed. And so I think when we talk about forgetting, we expect ourselves to do something that I think just for the sake of our humanity is impossible or goes against our nature of survival, living, learning from experiences.
So, okay, that's the forgetting part of things, and I think we can unpack that more. Why is forgiveness so important, though? Like, I think we have as a society, a very skewed understanding of what forgiveness is.
Yeah.
As Christ followers, we have a very skewed understanding of what forgiveness is. And I'd love to unpack that a little bit more, because I think this part of this came out in just doing some research for a new book and talking about this idea of finding the beauty in pain, and we can unpack that more in a different episode. But as I was doing this research, and I've shared this statistic before, but I've gone deeper into different studies that unforgiveness and bitterness are causes, if not number one, number two, or number three causes for cancer, heart disease, immune deficiencies, all these kinds of things. And it's not like I'm pulling this out of thin air. This is like studies in oncology wards and studies in, immunology research, and those kinds of things. So there's something to forgiveness. There's something to this idea of letting it go. And I know you've got an analogy that you use quite a bit with that.
Yeah. I like what you're saying too, though, because I think it balances out some of how I've been thinking about forgiveness for a while now. I was hearing about a situation in a country in Africa where there had been some tribal wars, and great devastation, like
Sure.
real devastating violence. And what happened was the aggressors lost and were kind of being placed under the legal system of this country or this village. I'm not entirely sure about all of that, but
Well, that's the interesting thing. Depending on where in Africa you are, there's national law, there's tribal law, there's village law. So it's
So I'm not entirely sure, but I don't think it makes the biggest difference for the concept, because what happened was, let's say the aggressor, the murderer, is brought into trial. The prosecutor, or the equivalent, would be the family member who survived. Like, so, let's say you, Mark, kill my wife. And
sorry, Bree.
I would bring you to court.
Right.
And I would accuse you of murder.
Right. And
the judge would preside. And in that court system, I have a legal right to vengeance, to retribution, to bringing consequences upon you. Like, that's my legal right as the survivor. In this situation, what happened was there was a legal proceeding of forgiveness. And what it meant was that I came into court and I turned to you and I said, I forgive you, and I give up my legal right to vengeance and retribution, and I get to leave the courtroom. You don't leave the courtroom,
right?
Because you're still facing the judge,
right?
But I get to leave the process and walk away and go on with my life, and I am not in that building anymore.
You're not held down by it. Yeah.
And I thought that was such a beautiful representation of what forgiveness can be, because it really has nothing to do with the other person.
Oh, yes, 100%.
We can forgive people that aren't even alive anymore,
or don't even, in our minds, deserve it, or
know that there was something,
or seeking it out, or know that was something. Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's a real beauty that we kind of miss out on.
Sure.
Because when forgiveness is about me, it means that I actually have some control, and I have some power, and I have the ability, and I can either hold on to that legal right of vengeance, which I think gives a lot of validation to an experience. If I look at a situation, especially in this example of you killing my wife, it validates my experience to know that I have a legal right to vengeance, to pursue retribution. And so I think that's validating to know, like, you were hurt, and there are consequences that you can reasonably feel like you should put on the other person. And that might be really minor. That might be really severe. It might be, in a work relationship, I'm not going to do any projects with you anymore because that's my seeking vengeance.
Right.
But it also means that I can give up that right, knowing, in this court case, I'm not letting you go for what you did.
Off the hook.
I'm letting myself go from being a part of it any longer.
Right. Well, I love that, and I'm going to butcher this thing, but you often hear that unforgiveness is like drinking poison and hoping the other person's going to die.
Yeah.
And it is all about us, and it is all about us choosing to. And this is, I think, where it takes intentionality, awareness, and some skill, and maybe some help on the side of things, because when you're wronged, there's that innate desire for justice.
Yeah.
Right? Huge justice piece. And we can look at it from a vengeance standpoint or a revenge standpoint. But you think about what that means, and how that affects the totality of who we are. And it's showing up in the science. Unforgiveness and bitterness cause cancer. Well, no, okay, let's go with me for a second. It's not a direct correlation.
Right.
But when you hold on to unforgiveness, when you hold on to bitterness, when you hold on to vengeance or desire to get even, and you don't release, that affects our cells, that affects our mind, that affects the stress hormones in our bodies, which affects our immune system.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, it begins to attack itself.
Yeah.
And now we're left open to disease, right? And so I wish And I think we're doing a better job of this, but I wish that faith communities would talk about this more. You know, I wish that as a society, we would do a better job of talking about this. And I think my question for you, just, you know, as a friend, is like, why? Why don't we talk about this? Why is this not a popular subject? And until it becomes, be a little fatalistic here, like until it becomes life or death.
Well, I think I'm going to challenge even that question, because especially in faith communities or in those kind of maybe non-religious but spiritual environments or conferences or yada yada that are self-focused or whatever, it seems like a pretty common thing to come up of like, the solution to all your problems is forgive. And I've been in so many.
But they walk away. They mic drop and they walk
100%.
away, and there's no practicality.
No.
How do I do this? This is not a one-off thing. This is
absolutely. And
right.
I think that's the big problem is that we're not actually talking about forgiveness. We're talking about forgetting in those situations.
Ooh, that went deep real quick. Yeah.
And so I think that's a big problem. And I think the reason we do that is because it's easier to try to forget something, even though it's impossible.
Because, okay, I'm trying to connect a bunch of different things here, but you know, the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah.
Like, our bodies remember.
Yeah.
Like, and when we have a wrong done to us, I'm not going to put it on the same level as big T trauma, but there are attachment wounds, relational wounds that can mirror or mask trauma. And if not dealt with over time.
Right. It eats your body away.
Yeah. You're not, to pretend to forget or to try to forget or to try to numb out. Yeah.
And I think it's, you know, I've been going through the EMDR certification process for the past semester.
Bless you.
Oof.
Bless you.
It's good, but it's so much work.
Just you know, listeners, just so you know that this is just confirmation that Trevor is not going to ever go back to school.
Oh my gosh, dude, I never want a PhD ever. It's so not worth it.
From your lips to God's ears.
Yeah. Sorry, Mark. Yours was worth it because I didn't have to do any of the work.
Right.
I'm noticing, like, even with trauma, the goal is not to forget the traumatic experience.
Nope.
It's to take away the power of that experience. And I think forgiveness does the same thing.
Say that again. And just like slowly, because that was really powerful.
Yeah. So EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, a form of trauma work. The goal is not to forget the traumatic experience. It's to remove the power from that experience.
And that's what forgiveness is.
Totally.
I love that.
And if we choose to just ignore it, it's like ignoring our trauma.
Well, and the power, it actually gains power.
Yeah.
If we ignore it.
Especially, I think bitterness and shame act like mold in our hearts.
Yeah.
They grow in the damp, dark spaces of our heart where we kind of close them off and don't want to deal with them because it hurts and it sucks and it stinks and it's gross to pull it out into the light and to clean it.
Yes.
I hate the smell of vinegar. Like, that's just something about me. I hate it. I also know that if I want to clean something that's moldy or mildewy or whatever, vinegar is a really good option. And I have to work through the distaste of working with vinegar, of doing something that grosses me out, working with mold and mildew, and this smell of a chemical that I really dislike.
Right.
But I need to have confidence too that in doing that work, even though it sucks, at the end, I will be much better for it. And I think
it's good.
It's good. It's good work.
Yeah.
It's hard work, but it's good work. And I don't think that we get encouraged enough in that.
No.
To take that first dangerous step into discomfort. Well,
both of us have had relational woundings in our life, some more recent than others. And I can say 100% I have forgiven. It doesn't mean that there's going to be a moment where I wake up in the morning and that the sting is still there. And I can choose to pick up vengeance and bitterness in that moment again. Or I can go, you know what? No, I've already forgiven. I'm going to do it again. And remember that.
I've already given up this legal right.
I've given up the legal right. I've given up the power. And it doesn't have any effect on me. And recognize, like the way I feel right now,
Yeah.
That sucks. That's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It means that something important to me was taken away, or something important, something happened
Yeah.
that left an imprint.
Yeah. There are certain people in my life that I hold a great amount of dislike towards. And if you would ask me 2 years ago, I would have said I hated them, and I have a vengeance for them.
Sure.
And that escalates too. I think there's an escalating nature where a small rupture expands if we ignore it long enough.
Go back to your wound, right? On your
Right.
leg. Like if it's a, half inch by, eighth of an inch cut, eighth of an inch deep, not horrible.
Mm-mm.
But if you don't tend to it, don't put Neosporin on it, you go and run through, a muddy river.
Yeah.
Right. It's going to get infected.
Or if you stretch that skin and
right.
aren't mindful of it, you can tear further and further. And I think unforgiveness is the same way. And so for those individuals, my amount of unforgiveness, that bitterness and that wound was much larger than it had any reason to be. And now, after working through forgiveness, knowing where I am, I can see those individuals and have a conversation with them if I have to, but I can also walk away from them if I want to.
Have some sense of compassion.
Yeah.
But
they're still a person.
But not a...
But I don't have to like them.
Well, right. And that's the thing, right? Yeah. Forgiveness doesn't mean that we're all chummy and have to like the person. It's again, going back to releasing that power and allowing us to move on or move through.
And because I haven't forgotten what that person did, if
they
try to do something that feels similar to that past wound, I'm able
or feels manipulative,
change the situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's the beauty of forgiveness too.
What if it's interesting? I just have this picture in my mind that we're releasing power, but we're gaining strength.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And power and strength are two different things. And I think we say that they're the same, but no, there's that almost submissive power over us that unforgiveness has. Where it's like you will bow,
and it makes us feel powerful sometimes.
At times, yeah, I've got this vengeance, I've got this justice, rah. But then strength is, I think, more of an identity piece.
Yeah,
the ability to step back and to go, okay, I've conquered, I've overcome, I've pushed through, and I'm better because of it.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, a couple of resources. This is a conversation that can continue for a very, very long time. But a couple of books that I would encourage you to pick up if you're interested in this is anything by Everett Worthington Jr. And you just type his name into
Google,
Amazon or Google. But his story is just powerful. And his work on forgiveness began after, I think it was his mom that was murdered. Again, go back and read his story. I read it. I've read his stuff. I use his stuff in counseling. One of his stories is in one of his books. But Everett Worthington Jr. is great. But then also look at Dr. Kurt Thompson's The Soul of Shame. I think recognizing some of the impacts that shame has on people is really important. What other resources? Mayfield Collective is going to be a big resource. We don't necessarily have anything on forgiveness yet, but we can and we will. And what other resources do you think we can?
Yeah, I think, I was going to say Thompson just because I think there is a close connection to bitterness and unforgiveness and shame.
Yes.
Because I think it thrives in darkness and kind of ignoring. I think really the biggest resource that I could recommend is finding a trusted individual to talk this out with, because I think sometimes we do need somebody else in the courtroom to say, yeah, this is your legal right, and you have the opportunity to walk away from this courtroom, rather than sitting in the same room as the person being convicted until they are convicted and sent to jail or whatever.
Right.
You have the freedom to leave. And I think a lot of the times we just need another person to be able to sit with us, and whether that's family or close friend or even therapist, like just being able to sit with somebody who is in your side of the court who's on your team, who wants what's best for you, not necessarily, definitely not what's worse to that other person, but what's best for you, right, I think is invaluable.
I think that's huge, because at the core, what is unforgiveness really about? It's about being seen and being validated in our pain and in our struggle. And so sometimes, we hold on to those things because we want to be justified. They hurt me. Yes, they did. I see you. I hear you. I recognize that this is painful. And now it's time to let go, to forgive. And I think a lot of times we hold on forgiveness because we've never been validated. And so if we think about it from that perspective, I wonder how that might change how we interact with the people around us.